I'm Mark Rothermich with Genesis Ag, and I'm here this morning with Josh Davis, Vice President of Genesis Ag. And Josh, we're here to talk a little bit this morning as we're currently in the fall of 2025. There's a lot of conversation in the industry right now with the pricing of fertilizers going up and commodities being not as great as a lot of us would like, and looking at the pressures next year. So, what are your kind of thoughts, maybe initially here, as we look at this situation?
Well, I think having a plan first and foremost of what we're going to do is how we're going to have to go into this. We definitely can't do what we've always done um, for the past how many ever years. Some generational farms dating back maybe 50 years plus. We're just not going to be able to fertilize for yield and have that expectation of yield and make it to the end of the year.
Right. It's a different game right now than what we've had for a couple of years. There's a lot of pressure in the ag industry. One of the things I think that is probably the most prominent thought in most producers' mind is reduction of fertilizer. Uh, it's pretty tough to look at how you can do too much more with herbicides or other inputs. So fertilizer becomes the one that most guys are kind of looking at right now. And I think when we talk about that possibility with guys, there's two big uh, challenges that really kind of pop up in looking at that. One is guys are concerned about losing yield, giving up yield if they reduce any of their fertilizer inputs. The other thing is they're concerned about mining their soils. So I think the first one, obviously, that jumps into everybody's mind is reducing yield. They don't want to take the chance of losing yield. Um, but what's been your experience as guys sometimes maybe trim some fertilizer inputs, P, especially P and K? I guess maybe that would be our main focus right now because that's the biggest portion of guys' expenses outside of nitrogen, which most guys are not going to significantly hit. Um, but if a guy's looking at reducing P or K inputs by 50, maybe even 75%, how much impact does that have on their yield next year, do you think? Or what have you seen, I guess?
Well, I think there's several avenues to that point. One of those being we've put it out for years, and the whole theory of you got to build soil and you got to do this, we've all tried that, but we don't know where the excess fertilizer that we put out is gone. From a standard soil test, that's kind of a selling tool for the people selling the fertilizer is well, you got to put more on it. And my dad's kind of famous, I always put MORON in quotes whenever he talks about the moron theory because that's what we've always been told to do, yet it's not necessarily gave a guy a dramatic advantage in a lot of scenarios that he's went out and added fertilize or excess fertilize, and we don't see that building process. And when people say, well, I grew a good yield, it had to be the fertilize, they sometimes don't understand that a very large percent, especially from a potassium standpoint, uh, is left in the fodder. So either working it in or leaving it on the stubble or even planting a cover crop into harvest or post harvest retains a lot of that potassium. The other thing would be kind of like what I mentioned before would be your plan going into the season. What number can we budget for? It may not be the 200 pounds of P and the 200 pounds of K of applied that we actually look at, not actual, that typically that's been costing us, let's say $100. It may be costing us $200 this year. Our budget still only allows us to apply the $100. The $200 is not a guaranteed increase on yield. So we're going to have to look at other avenues of accessing our stored P and K that's in our soil.
Yeah, you mentioned the kind of the psychology, I guess, really the selling points of fertilizer for many years. It really plays on a farmer's emotion, all of our emotion. that fear of missing out. Oh my gosh, if I don't put all of this fertility out there, I'm not going to raise the yield that I need. And, but really, I think part of our conversation that we'll roll into here is the science behind that. But you hit on a great point is the fact that when we go out and we apply 100 pounds of K out here on the soil, many of us have tried to improve our numbers in our soil so that we have more available nutrients. But when we put 100 pounds out there, our soil test doesn't move that much. And how often do we as producers really stop and think, well, okay, so only a portion of that's showing up in my soil test. Where did the rest of that go? So let's talk just briefly through where does that go? What happens to that extra fertility that we applied that's not showing up as available to our plants?
Yeah, so a large, vast majority of the P we apply ties up. I know you've got your phosphorus conundrum that you've went through, and if you're lucky, 20% of your P that you put out is available to that season's crop. Yet we're fertilizing for what our expectations are in that one season. And I don't remember the numbers exactly that you have, but if you go from year one to year 30, you should have enough phosphorus for 15 generations to farm on that acre, we'll say, of phosphorus needs for that crop. Yet we continually apply, 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 and now we're to the point that the last person I talked to last week was saying $900 a ton for phosphate. What do I do? Well, I'd probably try to get some out of the bank. It's pretty tough, and I've said this several times. If you've got $20 million in the bank and the bank tells you you can't have it, that's going to be a little upsetting for most guys if $20 million would is a lot of money to you. Now, we know people that may not worry about that, but that's the theory. If you've got money in the bank, you should be able to spend it. And I think that's how producers need to be looking is, okay, how can I access that? And potassium being the same way, potassium gets a little bit more complex with other nutrients as far as what it takes to activate the potassium, but it's still all chemical exchanges and chemical relationships that give us the number we're looking at on soil test or the availability that the plant has to produce those nutrients so it can uptake those from a soil chemical perspective.
Right. I think a lot of times we look at a soil test, and most soil tests, uh, all they're showing is the available component, what we deem to be the available component. But we know that you talked about the stockpile, the warehouse, what's in the warehouse, what's in the bank account, that component that we've applied, that for most of us is still there. We may lose a little bit of that P or that K erosion, and some things like that are going to maybe take a little of that off. But there's a lot of fertility that's been applied out here in our soils and the natural fertility that's out here. So, but most of our conventional tests that we've all been looking at for years only shows that little available component. And we've started using a different system. And do you want to talk briefly about what what our TND test is, just a little bit, and then we'll bring up an example that we can show guys a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's looking more at total soil density. We'll still look at the Malik 3, which is your immediate solubility, but looking at what's a more complex look that's in the soil, looking at relationships between soluble and insoluble nutrients. If we think we have a deficiency, do we really have a deficiency, or do we have a soil function hiccup, or do we have a soil biology hiccup that's not giving us access to what's in the bank account. And I guess that would be the one thing to look at it is your Malik 3 is the cash you've got in your pocket, and your T&D test is the money you've got in the bank that right now the bank's not letting you have. So, in a theory, when you run out of what's in your pocket, how do you get what's in the bank? And I know a lot of people are going to default, well, if I don't fertilize, I'm going to mine my soil. Or even landowners that rent their ground out, if they don't see the spreader buggy or the bigger spreaders in the Midwest, if the landowners don't see that go across, well, they're mining my soil. And you and I both know from as many soil samples as we've looked at is we don't have a soil mining problem. We have a soil activity problem. If if I were a landowner and somebody came to me and said, "Okay, do you want me to mine your soil or kill your soil?" What do you think the answer would be? Probably neither one. But
Right, exactly.
the fertilizer we're applying is somewhat of a detriment to our soil health because we've got soil biology out there and we don't do anything to re-promote that activity. But yet, if we don't put the fertilizer out there from a solubility perspective, everything we're doing from chemicals to running tillage or any of that across the ground doesn't repropagate the activity to keep that number more soluble from what it needs to be. So by default, yeah, it looks like you're mining the soil, but we're just beating the soil up.
Yeah. I love your analogy about the bank account. The one that I use a lot of times is, many of us, if we've done anything more than just a basic, very basic test, we're familiar with seeing a P1 and a P2 number on our soil results. And the way I like to put that into perspective is P1 is, it's what's in the glass that I can drink. P2 is what's in the pitcher that I can refill the glass with. But my question becomes, what's in the well? What's in the well that we can refill the pitcher and the glass with? And that's really, to me, the heart and soul of what this TND test that we've been using for several years now shows us. It gives us what's really there. And and this might be a good time to just go ahead and bring up one of the results from the test, and we can show guys a little bit what, and this is a very common um, situation. So let's bring that up real quick. All right, there we go. That looks pretty good, doesn't it? Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Josh, this is an example of one of the tests from one of the producers I've worked with for several years doing this. Um, and it's certainly very much a normal type of test of what we see. Um, and just to give guys just a brief overview, maybe the first column here, or the extractable result, is going to be your more conventional, your Malik 3 test gives us the available component that we're used to seeing. And then the column next to it, the total result, is the numbers that this test is extracting from those soils. Um, the thing that really jumps out to me on this particular test, we're talking about phosphorus and potassium. Um, On this one, phosphorus available is 43, and this is pounds per acre. Um, but the total amount there is 846. So 5% of his total phosphorus, and this is his 8-inch core. We're sticking with that plow layer. Uh, but only 5% of his phosphorus is in the available form. We talk about what's in the well, what's in the bank account. Talk about that.
Yeah, so as far as the difference, it's never going to be 100% soluble, but we've done enough of these and know enough relative yield on those that we've got some pretty decent ideas on where the percent soluble should be for the yields we're trying to get. So in looking at, hey, we've got 846 pounds and we're 43 pounds soluble, that will, just for easy math, we'll say that's 5%. That's probably fairly moderate. I would say it could be a touch lower than what the where 5% is at. I would like to see that a little bit higher, but it's never going to be 100. But looking that we've got 846 pounds, why why would we apply more? Because it's like you said, how do we get what's in the well, or how do we get what's in the bank account? If we just go apply more, the only person that's going to win that is who's selling the more. And we need a better soil function deal, you know, and there are other nutrients on here that you can look at, and you can make the argument that as high as the calcium is, it's going to be a struggle to maintain soluble phosphorus because those tie up along with aluminum there on the bottom list. So you look at chemical exchanges and chemical reactions in the soil, and you're like, okay, now I just need more phosphorus solubility. I need to activate that part of my soil, or I need to apply some of that, or just apply standard energy to it. I think that's the one thing producers, when you look at something like this, okay, what's my first step is, well, let's put some energy out there and let's build our beneficials. And it's not necessarily as simple as just going out and dumping, you know, a humic acid or putting a sugar source out there, because we need to do the proper things where our beneficials start out competing our non-beneficials. And I think a lot of times guys say, well, sugar, or humics are humics, but it's all a price point. It's not a functionality of, hey, what am I actually doing? So, somebody that may have never seen one of these, most samples across the country are going to look relative to this, maybe not as good or maybe a lot better in certain nutrients. But okay, how do I narrow that window between the extractable result and the total result? Let's put some beneficial energy out there.
Yeah. And that moves into, some of the strategies we can talk about, especially going forward. What can we do to optimize what we've got? I did want to bounce back real quickly though and just share with everybody where, like on this test, where we're seeing ballpark 5% availability of the phosphorus on all of the tests that I've run. I think about the lowest I've ever seen was about 3%. Some of the best was about 7. And typically that's on a highly manured uh, type field scenario. But I think the best I've ever seen was 7% of the phosphorus was in the available component. On the potassium, that's typically a little higher. This one's running what, about 11% probably. I've seen that run anywhere from 8%. I've seen them up 15, maybe 17%. And you can walk down through a lot of these nutrients and see that there's a lot more in our soils. And this is not an unusual test by any means. Um, but there's a lot more in the bank account out here than we've been told and shown in the past. And to me, you talked about, why aren't we upset that we can't access more of our bank account if the banker says, no, you can only have 5% of the money that's in your account? Hey, let's think about some alternatives. Maybe we need to talk to a different banker. Um, so any other thoughts in regards to those correlations of what we see in the tests?
Well, I would say, I know our focus here today is looking at P and K, just where the cost is at of how producers can look for an alternative. But you can see this has got how many ever nutrients on it, 12 or 13 maybe. That each one of those is like that. So how do we get more just soil activity in general and focus that on beneficial microbes to get the ball started? There's probably two, if not three layers to getting some of what's in the bank or what's in the well and get that where we can utilize some of it. But there's got to be a strategy, and it's got to be a targeted strategy. It can't just be, well, we're going to go pour gas on the fire kind of deal. But we've got to have a strategy throughout our growing season. That way we can start mending some of these things, because not that anything is bad. Some are better than others, but if we can start a process and get the ball rolling in the right direction, then that unlocks a really untapped potential for farms all across the country.
It really does. And, you know, I've pulled these personally across 4 states, 4 or 5 states that I work. I know you, as vice president of the company, see a lot more of these across the nation. And, you know, everybody has things in the bank account. Um, you did talk, you know, so you started talking about how we can use the different strategies to access that and to utilize it if a guy is looking at maybe reducing. You know, we're not saying don't ever put any fertility out there, but hey, in this time when things are tight, let's reach into the bank account. You know, one of the things I love about this test is we can run this every year and we can monitor these levels. I've got guys that have really significantly reduced, even in a couple of situations, eliminated fertility for a year or two. And surprisingly enough, we're not impacting these tests as much as many people would expect. And they're still maintaining the same yields across those portions of the farm as where they're putting, you know, big numbers of fertility. So to me, especially in this time, the next year or two, when we're looking at these tough times, let's reach into that bank account, utilize some of that that money we've got stockpiled from the past. And, you know, in the future, you know, if we see we need to add some back in, let's do it. So I think that's the biggest point that I wanted to talk about today is just encourage guys to look at utilizing some of utilizing this test, even on a few fields, to get a comfort level of what have I got in the warehouse initially. If I'm looking at reducing some input dollars, can I do that with a comfort level and monitor it and make sure of what's going on out here in my environment? So to me, I'd really like to see guys reach out to us and engage with us to do a few more of these tests this year.
Yeah, and even the guys that don't do it and start trying to piece together a plan, yeah, having this piece of paper in front of you gives you the confidence behind it. But we've got, I would say, several thousand of these that they're all like this. Now, it may be a better, uh, stronger focus on one element versus the other, but the things that we're facing right now, fertility is a big impact for us, and how can we redirect those dollars and not lose anything? And I, I still think we there's a lot of unknown out there from a farmer perspective and having confidence to reduce fertility, but we're just not in a luxurious state that we can continue to put out a couple hundred pounds of P and K and keep that profitable.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk just a little bit now about those strategies, that you've alluded to already. Some different ways you talked about, adding carbon or energy to our soils. All of our soils do still have some native biology there. You've talked about there's a chemical component to act to making these nutrients available that are tied up in our profile. There's also the biological component, and biology is a big buzzword. Uh, and of course, we'll talk about that a little bit more first. But let's first talk about a guy's got native biology in his soil that's working along these lines already. And what are the things that we can do? You've talked a little bit about how we promote that, how we encourage more of that. Let's talk just a little bit more about what ways within the Genesis program guys can do that and where our products fit.
Well, hands down, the easiest thing we could jump into would be understanding that guys have native biology, like you said. Okay, how are we going to feed that? Without doing some elaborate testing, and it's hard to even send a sample off and get your diversity tested because things change. Um, Real-time tests are probably the best way, and that's not necessarily something we can feasibly do in row crop agriculture. So just having the understanding we've got native biology out there, how can we feed the beneficials? And I think a lot of times there's not a focus on there's beneficials and non-beneficials in the soil food web. But a lot of what we look at, like with a product, let's say carbose, for instance, everybody says sugar in the industry. Well, if we just put raw sugar out there, whether it be dextrose or whatever 50-pound bag we get at the co-op or maybe at Sam's or Costco or even a molasses-based product, is a lot of those feed everything. So having the unknown of, okay, what's our balance of good and bad, and we feed everything, are we doing the right thing? Yeah, I've had several conversations with producers about molasses more specifically. If you've got a diseased crop, I've actually seen where molasses will feed the disease, like a tar spot issue, because that's been big for us, I guess, the last 4 or 5 years, where guys are saying they're putting sugar in the tank, yet they're making don't want to say an uneducated decision, but it's kind of what it is of, okay, we think we're doing the right thing, but yet we're feeding the thing that's killing us. And I think that's something that we can offer that's a little bit different with something like carbose. Carbose is only going to feed your beneficials. Uh, and it's also got biology in it. So, like when it gets on the leaf of the plant, it's going to work toward a beneficial state. So, if we've got anything on the leaf, it's going to start consuming that. Is it going to act like a fungicide? Of course not. But we can start promoting plant energy in a beneficial fashion that the plant can start fending off maybe some of those diseases. Or as it secretes root exudates, we've got a lot stronger exudation of, okay, I need to feed my calcium solubilizing bugs in my root zone or whatever the plant's calling for at that point. If we can get a more robust effect with whatever our target is, I think that's the simplest and easiest way to go about things.
Yeah, and one of the things I really love about, or really think is important and valuable, is the functionality of our products. And a lot of times we do typically recommend utilizing carbose in conjunction with Vita and Terra, which is our humic fulvic, very specialized humic fulvic acid product. Uh, we try to be common sense at least with those. And while we've got guys who use them multiple trips across or almost every trip across the field, potentially. You know, our initial target a lot of times with that is we want to get some out there at planting time, whether it's as an in-furrow application or possibly, with a pre-emerge application. Then we like to come back. We like to tie it with trips guys are already making, because obviously it's not free to run the sprayer across the field. So let's put it in when we know we're going to be out there. And those 3 times, like I say, are somewhere at planting time, then with a post-emerge application of a herbicide oftentimes, and then later in the season as we get toward a fungicide application, utilizing it there.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. We know that things can be beneficial at certain timings, but we don't have the luxury going over thousands of acres to say do specifically at this time. So if we could do something with the planter and do something with our post-emerge chemistry and then do something with our disease management late season, those are typically the only opportunities, unless we've got a drone or we've got a field next to the shop where we're trying to run the sprayer out of liquid for our next application, that may only get those 2 to 3 applications in a season. And we've been successful at that. Carbos, just at Carbos alone, is a lot of my first steps with guys of doing it with the planter and doing it with both their chemical passes in season, and doing that at 8 ounces, you start talking a 24 ounce total application in a season. It is $12. It's not like it's a $50 or $60 expenditure of how are we going to track that. And I think last year, year before last, can't remember specifically, but we actually put that in a pretty decent research block, and just without any other change, no fertility change, no nothing, it was almost 8 bushel. So, that far and above paid for itself at that point in time. Right now, we're struggling with commodity prices, but that's still going to give us an additional 8, 9, 10 bucks an acre, depending on how we market our grain. We're going to have to be that specific with what we're going to face going into 2026. Even what we've had to face in 2025, we're going to have to figure out how to get those $10 nuggets.
Right. We sure are. No doubt about it. So implementing something like Carbos into an existing program is one of the strategies. Let's talk a little bit more about maybe, if a guy wants to extend that a little bit farther uh, with supplementing his biology with some of the products maybe in our lineup. And Revita N is a great product that we look at a lot. If a guy is truly interested in trying to maximize his efficiency with things, where does Revita N fit in there for you with that?
Well, Revita N's just going to be your broad spectrum. Let's get your soil more active. Let's get your diversity popping, and let's get your overall beneficials. And if we don't have a certain group of bacteria there, there's maybe a little bit of what a specific farm might need in Revita N, as far as, let's take something like a zinc bug, for instance, something that gets zinc more soluble or sulfur, any of that, it's going to impact all these nutrients we're looking at just a little bit as we go along. It's going to give us the option. I know nitrogen fixation has been big in the industry probably for the last 8 years, and it doesn't seem like anyone's brought a product to the table, and we've not necessarily touted hard that Revita N can fix nitrogen as well. But you start looking at like this sample that we've looked at being a 2.26 organic matter, you start doing your calculations of nitrogen in that organic matter. And if you can increase that by 2 or 3%, we could end up with 70 or 80 pounds of nitrogen throughout the season. Now, it's not specifically when you need it, per se, because biology, we don't control when biology works. We just, biology is a fluid motion. But if we know within a growing season that we could have 80 free units of nitrogen out there, wouldn't it be nice to maybe cut that back a little bit?
Hmm.
So nitrogen fixation is something that's another thing we don't get on any of our soil tests, because I think someone figured out a long time ago that farmers aren't going to cut nitrogen back. But that's another element that we're looking at 80 plus cent a pound in nitrogen. And let's say that most guys are looking at a 200 to 250 bushel average, and we're let's just say we're 1 pound to 1 bushel for easy math. We're looking at, what's that going to be, 150 to $200 of nitrogen that we're going to have to apply in this next crop. What if we can not lose bushels but get the efficiency down to 7/10? If we could cut 30% of that out, that's a big deal for a lot of guys. So I still back to the beginning when we started talking, we need a plan going into it.
Hmm.
And I think that's where you and I or anybody else on our team, that if a customer were to look at something like we're talking about, is helping guys get that plan put together and say, okay, this is an idea.
Right. Absolutely. I wanted to uh, step back real quickly. One of the other things that I've seen working with Revita and in conjunction with our TND test that we were showing here, I've got producers who, as we've run this test for a couple of years, we're seeing the available component increasing um, every step of the way, with them utilizing not just the pounds per acre of available, but the percentage is increasing as well. You talked about that earlier. How can we make a higher percentage? I mean, it does, we're not trying to say it doesn't take fertility to grow a crop. It absolutely does. Our objective is how can we maximize the efficiency of that fertility that's out there? How can we make it available? And to me, that's where, you know, the implementation, supplementing some of those microbial communities that maybe we beat up a little bit through our practices. Um, but to speak to your final point there, going forward, having that plan, making a plan, right now we're kind of in a position where a lot of us have to make that plan. Uh, I encourage guys, even when times are better, it makes sense to utilize these type of practices just for maximum profitability. But as we're faced with having to do something now, we'd love to talk with people to show them what the experiences we've had, and see if there's some things we can do here to help bridge that gap, help them get through to the point where this cycle turns back up and profitability is a little bit easier.
Oh, I agree. And I think that's where our focus has always been. Yeah, yield can create profit, but looking at what we're going into now, what is it worth? Let's say for $4 corn, is it worth giving up 10 bushel to increase profit by $60 an acre?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if my math, I've only got 10 fingers here, but if my math's correct, we're going to net $20 more an acre. And it's surprising to me how many guys, I've said before, take less to get more. And that coffee shop talk has seemed very important, but I think that's going to be something. Yeah, yield contests are still fun, but if we could end up in net 20 more bucks an acre or 10 more bucks an acre, or maybe $2 or $3 an acre is the difference on a large farm, that's what's going to keep us pedaling forward for the future, because we don't know what's going to happen. Why does it make sense to us that our commodity prices are the lowest they've been in what, 10 years, and we've got the highest fertility prices we've ever had? Like who's pulling the chain here?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, Josh, any other thoughts as we kind of wrap things up here today? I think we've done a good job of kind of talking through the Genesis Ag approach and just a couple of our products. But what other closing thoughts might you have?
Well, again, I want to re kind of just retick on the thing we've got to have a plan of success. You know, a lot of things that I've done, I would say in the last 12 to 18 months is okay, what's your extended corn average, your 5-year average or your 7-year average, and even on beans as well. I know we typically focus, um, farmers, producers typically focus on corn and then we wait till the next corn crop and just kind of overlook beans, but really having a plan together. And I think all of our team could help anyone maybe put a successful plan together. That's the biggest key in this, and it starts now. I mean, most of us are still in the combine, but we're kind of seeing the end of this road for 2025 for the crop at least. I think the end of 2025 needs to be what's my successful plan going to be for 2026?
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that. And today's conversation for me again was really just to encourage guys to take a look at the TND test. We're at that time of the year when most of us are pulling tests. We typically do these as composite samples, not necessarily grids. We're not trying to manipulate uh, areas. Uh, but I just would really like to encourage guys, reach out, talk to one of us or somebody on the team. What can we do? How can we run a few of these tests, get a snapshot of where things are? But to me, this is let's set a baseline. First off, let's know where you're at to begin with, but let's set a baseline for the future to monitor things, to see what's really going on out here in our soils as we venture forward.